This is the whole population of Russia. You're lucky if you're this guy. He was born in Moscow, and without even acknowledging it, he already has an advantage over the rest of the guys. He becomes a beneficiary from the capital's rent. But there is no need to adore or hate him. It's just that the chaos of the universe has made him appear where the grass is greener and the sun shines brighter. But why the grass is greener in the capital is the main question of this video. You all know there is big money circulating in Moscow. Not even big, but enormous money, that salaries are 2 to 3 times higher than those in the regions. But how did this come about? How did it happen that the economy of Moscow makes for the 5th part of the economy of the whole country? There is 9% of the Russian population, and they produce 20% of all goods and services in the whole state. The remaining 80% of the economy is unequally distributed among the 84 regions. Moreover, neither the main oil and gas center, nor St. Petersburg, nor even the Moscow region can compete with the capital. By the way, now you know where 40% of the country's economy revolves, in Moscow and its region, St. Petersburg and the Tyumen region. The remaining 60% is spread across 81 regions. Needless to say, Moscow, unlike other constituent entities, is very independent. On its own, it replenishes its budget by as much as $36.6 billion. This is simply a colossal sum. By comparison, the Moscow region has collected 4 times less, although the number of people living there is only 1.5 times less. By the way, it may be new to some people, Moscow is not part of the Moscow region. Moscow is sort of a separate region, just like Washington, D.C. is a separate entity. It's also the same with St. Petersburg in Russia. These are cities regions. The gap between Moscow and St. Petersburg is also substantial, with 4 times as much independent money, although the population there is only 2 times less. It is even embarrassing to compare it to other regions. I have a spreadsheet in front of me with the data. Let me choose regions randomly. Here are 31 regions, with all their cities inside, with all 62 million people, and their total budget funded from independent sources is $46.7 billion, a figure comparable to Moscow alone. In short, you realize that the money they have there is simply unrealistic, no matter what statistics you compile, what regions you take into account. And here we need to make a little pause. Those who watch this video and don't understand what independent sources of funding are, what budget transfers are, why there is no money in Russian regional cities, how personal income tax, VAT, mineral extraction tax, corporate income tax are distributed, and why the city mayor cannot be in opposition to the governor, then click and watch our previous video. Before knowing why Moscow is so rich, you also have to know why Russian regions are so poor. As they say, if you don't love me at my, then you don't deserve me at my. And we are jumping into the causes of all these frenzied financial distortions. So, to begin with, Moscow has a special status. It is not part of the Moscow region. Moscow is a separate entity. It is a super agglomeration, a city region, so to speak. For comparison, this is the situation almost everywhere else in Russia. There are cities with hundreds of miles in between. More often than not, the empty spaces in between are diluted by the occasional village. The economy ties between the cities are of course well established, especially if there are roads and railways, but most of the inhabitants are stuck inside their cities. To manage such an area, a regional level is introduced above the city level, so different types of budgets appear as well. A city treasury, funded by a small portion of personal income tax, and a regional treasury, funded by a larger portion of personal income tax and corporate income tax. But the situation in Moscow is different. There are no empty spaces there. It is a huge agglomeration, a densely populated urban jungle, in which 20 kilometers or 12 miles from home to work by public transport is generally normal. And since there is no regional level here, absolutely all the personal income tax goes to the budget of Moscow, and the same goes for the corporate income tax. Well, almost. In fact, there are still divisions within the city into the districts, and Moscow accordingly determines where to leave how much personal income tax. But as a rule, not even 1% stays there in the districts. So, the whole of Russia lives according to the rule. The city receives transfers from the region, and the regions receive them from the federation. Moscow, on the other hand, has a direct link to the federation. So what, you might ask? St. Petersburg also works according to the same rule. But it is different from Moscow. In St. Petersburg, there is no this much of money. Moscow has collected more corporate income tax than the entire budget of St. Petersburg. Could it be that they work so much harder there than the rest of Russia? And here we come to the main trick. When we say the corporate income tax in such an area is this much, an abstract picture comes to mind. Well, if they collect a lot of income tax, it means there is a lot of profit in that area from a lot of businesses. But unfortunately, this is not the case. The biggest taxpayers are specific companies that you probably know. If you take the biggest companies, here you see them on screen, pay attention to their place of registration. Moscow, 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 Sialgut, St. Petersburg, Krasnodar, Moscow. Well, you get the idea of the trick here. Rosneft, the third biggest company in Russia that trades in oil and gas, has oil fields in Tyumen region and petrol stations all over Russia, though it is registered in the capital. And that's where it pays income tax. Now transfer this scheme to all the other major companies like Gazprom, Lukoil, Sberbank. To be more precise, 296 of the country's top 500 companies are registered in Moscow, and 70% of their revenues are concentrated in the capital. I mean, there are big companies operating all over the country, many of them raw material companies, but their profit tax, for the most part, goes to where the headquarters is located. In the case of our country, it is Moscow. And you don't see that kind of super concentration anywhere else. You can compare it to the US, where the capital is just an administrative capital, with only 11 Fortune 500 companies registered there. The business capital is considered to be New York, with 54 companies. The capital of IT is California. Many people move to Texas and other states. And generally, the headquarters are evenly scattered across the country, with Washington, D.C. among the outsiders. In Canada, regarding business field, the first place would not be Ottawa, but Montreal, Vancouver, or Toronto. Even in China, Beijing is balanced by Shenzhen and Guangzhou. In our country, Moscow is the capital, a business center, an IT hub, an innovation hub, everything. By the way, Skolkovo, which is our response to Silicon Valley, was originally located on the territory of the Moscow region and was accordingly administered by the region. But the genes of centralization proved so strong that Moscow decided to take away a piece of land from the region where the construction took place. And voila! From July 1st, 2013, a territory of Skolkovo has successfully become part of Moscow. Even here, they could not resist. And don't think it's us, armchair liberals, who are stirring things up. Back in 2013, Dmitry Medvedev, prime minister at the time, wanted to move state companies from Moscow to the regions by order, and even chairwoman of Federal Senate suggested.
to move Gazprom's head office to Tumen-Rosneft to Siberia, Russian technologies and Russian railways to the Urals, and Ruskие Dora to Krasnoyarsk. This will spread the economic life and boost development in the regions, not only in the economy, but also in education, healthcare, and social infrastructure. I know how much resistance there will be if this idea is proposed. Of course, everyone wants to be closer to Moscow. Everyone wants to live on Rublovka. But today, these arguments, they are shattered by modern information technology, the internet, and other things.
As we can see, in 9 years the situation has not changed. No decentralization has taken place. Although these statements are still thrown in the media and the government kind of discusses them. Relatively recently, in 2019, the Ministry of Economic Development has prepared 118 proposals on how to develop the regions. One of the points was the relocation of officials, state corporations, their headquarters and subsidiaries from Moscow and St. Petersburg to the regions. But things didn't move forward beyond the discussions. Some explain this state of affairs by history and geography. Russia has always been surrounded by enemies. It has always had to fight wars, and therefore needs a center far from the borders and a strong hand to make quick decisions. In any case, we have what we have, and this desire for centralization leads to anomalies. Guess which is the main oil exporting region? Kyanty-Mansi Autonomous Okrug? Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug? Tatarstan or Sakhalin? Of course, it's Moscow. Did you really think that our main exporters were the main production and processing regions? No way. All the above-mentioned regions are pale in comparison, with their tens of billions of dollars. The capital has exported minerals abroad to the tune of 123 billion. I do not know how they do it. They produce oil in regions, take the barrels to the capital, and then sell them as if from the capital, or everything is decided on the level of document, but the fact remains the main oil exporter is Moscow. Now let's get the whole picture together. On the one hand, the capital, like St. Petersburg and Sevastopol, has the special status of a city region, so personal income tax and corporate income tax are sent to their own budgets. But the corporate income tax itself would not be so big if there were not large profits generated by the largest and more often oil and gas companies operating all over the country but registered in Moscow. All this stimulates high-paying job positions in the capital. Moreover, everything moves on by inertia. All the big players realize that it is simply more convenient to be in the capital in order to lobby their interests, in other words, to negotiate with the government, and some even with the Kremlin. And don't forget that the capital is also home to the distributors of the federal budget. This too imposes a certain imprint. And I don't need to explain that although formally the managers of the federal budget and the capital's budget are different people, there are certain links between them. Take the case of how the capital's budget allocated $260,000 to the daughter of a federal official for promotion in social networks. And you don't have to be an anti-corruption FBI agent to realize this is just the tip of the iceberg. The current situation is very accurately described by Russian Academy of Sciences staff.
Thus, the city budget receives large revenues through profit tax from large public and private companies registered in Moscow, through payroll taxation of their headquarters and federal government employees, and indirect revenues through business taxation generated by the demand from the center.
That said, despite the fact that the capital is already successfully collecting tens of billions of dollars, the Federation continues to allocate money to Moscow. In 2018, for example, they've allocated $1.2 billion to Moscow. That's pocket change, of course, compared to independent revenues, but $1.2 billion is the entire budget of, for example, Penza or Kirov regions. That is, it's as if the entire budget of the actual region was poured into Moscow from the Federation. There is a huge amount of money accumulated in the capital's budget that it is not even clear what to spend it on. Look at this graph. That's how different the per capita income of the capital's budget is from the rest of the regions. That is, in 2009, Moscow's per capita income was about 3 times higher than the regional average. As a matter of fact, by now it has remained that way. The capital continues to earn 3 times as much as the regions. The situation with education, on the other hand, is not so stable. Whereas the capital's authorities used to spend twice as much on education as the regions, the situation is now leveling out. It is clear that everything is still bigger and it is a sin to complain, but the long-term trend is negative. Moreover, we have detected the same trend. If you look at how the share of budget expenditure has changed, education is in trouble and healthcare has almost halved. What the soul is really at peace with is the expenditure on landscaping and development of public amenities. Well, Moscow is indeed beautiful, I agree, all shiny and clean. And rightly so. In the beginning of the 2010s, capital's expenditure was 4 to 5 times higher than the regions, but then spending on landscaping skyrocketed like a Bitcoin exchange rate in 2021, about 4 times. So now 20 times more is spent on street refurbishment. Once again, this is per capita, not absolute values. Everyone keeps saying that Russia is all about regional economy, but that is just talk. So far, there are 2 Russias, Moscow and the rest. Although experts dealing with this subject distinguish as many as 4 Russias. So we will end this episode with her words. If Moscow did not have such high rent incomes, labor migration flows would be more evenly distributed among Russia's major cities. Now we say a huge thank you for our big guys from Patreon. We're grateful to you for staying with us this long. Share this video with your friends, hit the like button and shitpost in the comments. And I'm the researcher.